Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the speech number 3. On the evening of January 28th, 1986, President Ronald Reagan addressed the nation. That was his original plan, but this was at a different circumstance than what he thought of before. Now, that morning, tragedy had struck the nation, and it was in the form of the Space Shuttle Challenger. It had lifted off that morning from Florida and exploded 74 seconds after takeoff. This had never happened before in NASA's history, and what was different about this liftoff is that it was heavily broadcasted across the nation. Many people had watched it, including school children across the country. President Reagan addressed these school children with these words: "The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave." What he was referring to is the bravery of the crew, the bravery that they had to go further in exploration and to risk their lives. Reagan's words provided clarity and hope to the people. His nickname was the Great Communicator, and for good reason. The evening of his speech, he proved this once again. He had the ability to connect with others with his words and to bring a country whole again. A brief background of the situation: Ronald Reagan was a speaker, and he was the 40th President of the United States. He had just entered into his second term, and he had originally planned to speak to the nation that evening, but the circumstances changed. Originally, he was going to speak on the State of the Union, but that morning, the Challenger exploded shortly after takeoff. It was a hard thing to bear, and at that moment, the nation needed him. He didn't have to respond, but he chose to. His speech was a mere 648 minutes, but what he communicated was necessary. His speech was simple, clear, and concise. His words were genuine, and it was exactly what the country needed at that time. His voice spoke to all of the citizens, including the school children that watched, and also the family that was just a distance away from the launch pad. If you can imagine the situation in your mind of the space shuttle taking off and moments later, 2 pillars of clouds appearing, there was a lot of confusion, a lot of anger and anguish, and not much hope. His speech allowed them to look to the future and to reflect on the events of that day. The school children were confused, the families were grieving and mourning, but he was able to bring hope to the situation. The speechwriter, Peggy Noonan, put together his emotions and his thoughts that he delivered earlier that morning at a press conference. And what she came up with changed the nation forever. There was a couple of aims that they had with the speech. One was to comfort those that were confused and frightened by the events of the day. They were able to do that through his words and through the way that he spoke to the nation and the way that he responded. He was able to define the event, not as one of defeat, but as one of hope and bravery and honor. He emphasized that the space program would continue. This wasn't the end, but it was only the beginning, and the crew of the Challenger was taking us to the future. Reagan's words met a nation that was at a loss for words. Many people didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to react, and quite frankly, they were just mourning, but they didn't know how to do that as a whole. He gave them the ability to do that. One of his words, or a phrase that he said, was, "We mourn their loss as a nation together." No one was alone. The school children that didn't really understand what happened weren't alone. The families weren't alone. And also the NASA crew members who had planned tirelessly and for countless hours for this mission that only lasted a mere 74 seconds. Along with that, he was able to honor the Challenger crew and the NASA employees. He reflected on the accomplishments that NASA had brought them to. And as a people, we had forgotten that. We had forgotten the things that they had did because we were hard to dazzle They had done amazing things like land on the moon and orbit the Earth, but this is the first time that tragedy had struck in such a way. So Reagan was able to bring clarity, comfort, and hope to a seemingly hopeless situation. His closing remarks included a quote. It says, "The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us by the way they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they waved goodbye on their journey and slipped the surly bonds of Earth to touch the face of God." Reagan was a definer of the event. He could have taken a step back and allowed the country to absorb the situation on their own, but he allowed himself, and he took action, to be the interpreter, to honor the crew members and remember them, as well as their families. This was one example of how Reagan served his country well. He was a great communicator, and he connected a mourning country and allowed the nation to look to the future with hope. Thank you. So now we've got a couple moments for question and answer. So it could be anything about the situation or the speech.
Why, if he was a great communicator just in general, why did you choose this speech over other speeches that he's given?
Other speeches that he gave could include his campaigns or regular State of the Union addresses and times that he was pushing his own agenda in a sense. But this one was his choice. He didn't have to give the speech. He could have just sent a press release with his words, but instead he decided to speak to the citizens of America in a way that showed that he believed in America and that there was hope for the future. So that's why I thought this one was really significant. It was genuine.
Why did you choose this speech over any other? I mean, you could have chosen anything. So why did you choose Ronald Reagan in this particular?
Well, really, I just searched significant speeches, and this is one of the top ones that came up for Americans. And so it's known as across the nation as something that was significant. It was important. And previously, I didn't even know about it until I started the assignment.
Would you consider him a good role model?
I would, because he was a celebrity. He was an actor and from a wealthy family, but he was able to connect with a common man. And he had the ability to do that, and many politicians don't. They can speak well, but the words that they say aren't simple. They're not genuine. But his were.
What was the main thing you took away from this speech to apply to your own life and your own speeches?
Yeah, one thing that he said during his speech was he just wanted to be honest. And he said things bluntly, but in a way that was clear. And so not sugarcoating a situation when it's obviously one of confusion and mourning, and it wasn't a happy time for the Americans, and he didn't make it that way, but he was able to turn a terrible situation into one of hope and of honor. These are good questions.
Oh, okay. So, this is a two-part question. You said that he talked about school children, right? Or he addressed them. So, why do you think that he specifically targeted him or them in his speech?
I believe he targeted them because he knew that as children they would be slightly confused by the situation, as many were. When I was growing up, the events of 9/11 and the terrorist attacks, I didn't understand the magnitude of it, and so I can kind of relate with why he decided to address them in that way specifically. Well, I appreciate you all coming and listening to my speech, and hope that you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.